Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Menno Hilberts. Up until recently, headed up the development arm of CitizenM. I left the company after 15 years in August, unfortunately. But a lot of these slides still are CitizenM slides because that's been my life for 15 years, trying to build modular hotels. We started in 2008 in Amsterdam, and I moved to the US to head up the US rollout in 2016. So, question for today is modular construction, the future of construction. I mean, I hear this a lot. It's like every year there's a new McKinsey report saying, oh, they're going to change the industry. It's going to be the future. We're all going to be modular. Well, my experience is slightly different, and I'm going to show you what I was about. So if you look at modular buildings, they don't look in the finished form, at least from our perspective, look any different from a traditional building, but they are if you unpack them. A couple of slides on CitizenM, the brand, for those who don't know or not familiar with it. We started in 2008 in Amsterdam, largely born out of frustration with the current hotel offering. We thought as frequent travelers we could do better, so we developed a brand by the frequent traveler for the frequent traveler, value conscious. And what really sets us apart from the norm in hotel land is we only have one room. It's a king-size room, but only 8 foot and a bit wide. We really started modular thinking, the width of a shipping container. But the room's fully functional, really high-end. So it's like a luxury yacht cabin almost. Great bed, great shower, the essentials. So what we take away in real estate in your room, we don't try to solve everything in the room. We give it back in the living room, which is that our lobbies are really vibrant spaces. They're there to hang out with fellow travelers. You meet a lot of people. You can have coffee, drinks, cocktails, 24-hour F&B. They're full of art. So they're really fun spaces, which typically hotel lobbies aren't that. So why modular, right? Modular was really our thought from 2008 onwards. And before we answer that question, I really want to take a look at the alternative. The alternative is traditional construction, right? That's the world you all live in, I guess, most of us live in. And it's a world of constant fighting. I don't know about you, but I was kind of tired of it. Starting my career in construction and development. You have all these drawings, specs, a budget and contracts, and they all point at each other, and we spend our day fighting over who owns what and who is at fault for this problem. It's pretty adversarial. You start with a new team every time, right? Every project is blank canvas. You start and really only deliver one-off prototypes. There's not a lot of consistency in construction in general, not in hotel construction either. And they're all, honestly, if you step back and look at it, they're all pretty bad. They're all too expensive, take too long. Even the ones that are on budget and on time really aren't. And they're inferior quality too. I mean, this is one of the best builds I've seen, so kudos to this place. But you could probably find 40 punch list items in this room alone. Imagine if you had an iPhone and said, well, it's okay, but it's got 40 punch list items, or you bought a car. Yeah, we've got the wheels. Somebody will fix that in the next 2 weeks. That wouldn't work. But yet we've come to accept that level of quality in construction. So if you actually do this, it's a thought experiment, right? If you build, and to the right is a downtown LA property we developed. If you create that same volume out of stacked Teslas, it'd be cheaper than building traditional. Which is really, if you think about it, our hotels are pretty nice, but they're not as advanced as Teslas. Traditional construction is really not competitive in that sense. So we looked at other ideas to roll out concepts rather than just do one-off projects, right? So we looked at not the sexiest examples, but IKEAs and McDonald's. And also looked at other industries, right? We hired a couple of people from the manufacturing, industrial design space and said, hey, what can we learn from that? Because they do rollouts, right? They do things differently. They don't start with a new team for every project. No, they spend a lot of time in, I guess, what we call pre-con. They integrate all the teams in the front end, have supply chain partners that are really in there for the long term, and focus on quality and predictable outcomes and not just finger pointing and risk management. And they come up with an assembly line. That's really what we wanted to do as well, right? To set up an assembly line and just create these new build hotels. And in manufacturing, you have a rollout, obviously. And if you think about our hotels, they're 80% repetitive. All the guest rooms are pretty much the same in our case. And then we have 20% custom designed for the lobbies and the back of the house on the ground floor, typically. So zooming in on the modular rooms, they're really all the same. The first couple of hotels, they were really all the same. We didn't even have handed rooms. And on the right is a picture of the room, the way it's produced in the factory. It's fully completed and then shipped to site. And I want to share with you some of the things I've learned over 15 years of doing modular. We've built 12 hotels, modular, around 3,000 rooms. And unfortunately, we had to deal with 10 different manufacturers because they keep going out of business. And we're first in a lot of places. We're the first modular high-rise in New York. We're first modular high-rise in LA, and the city didn't want to give us permits. And we're first all the time. I would love to be second. I'm tired of being the one that has to convince politicians to get on board with this and trailblazing. And also the fact that we couldn't find a US manufacturer, and we had to manufacture first in Poland, and then we shifted to China. It was quite painful, especially during COVID. So if you unpack this thing, what does it look like, right? So typically you have a traditional build podium, which is no different from most hotels, limited service. So that's the yellow and the blue part. It's a steel or concrete frame with a podium on top of it. And then the fun starts. Then you just stack Lego blocks on top of that. And these cages, we usually do them one bedroom with a corridor, but more often than not, we have two cages, so 2 restrooms with a piece of corridor in the middle, and that's how you stack and make a complete building. So sequencing-wise, it's a bit different. By the time you break ground, you're also doing this in a factory. So this is really different from traditional construction where it's a nice sequence. You start with dirt, as we heard yesterday, right? It's like months of excavation. Not here. You have to think in reverse, much like manufacturing. You have to think and get all the details out of the way before you start production, because this is what it looks like by the time you break ground on site. This is a picture of a production facility for the last mods we did in LA and the Bay Area, Menlo Park. They were produced in China, and these facilities are massive. They produced 300 units for us in, I think, 8 weeks. It's pretty remarkable. So all you see, it's a panel picture, it's all you see is the hotel. It took a little bit of time to get them on board with the quality we're looking for, but we got there eventually. And this is a picture of a hotel in the belly of a ship. So this is something that my kids, when they were young, I would tell them stories and they would draw pictures of hotels on a boat. But we actually did this. This is, yeah, it's a real life picture. And this is the fun part of a modular project. You built the podium, as you can see here, the concrete frame. And then you're flying these mods. And that goes up so quickly. In a matter of weeks, you really build a 10-story building. And it just doesn't happen in normal construction where you start with nothing in the morning. And then in the evening, you've got 20 new hotel rooms finished, fully punched and depunched on site. Yeah, this is a fun 2 months or even less on the project. It's awesome. And the buildings we built, they're boxy, but they're good. You wouldn't, if it's not low quality modular that has that connotation a lot of times. And our lobbies are pretty high end. And guests really don't notice it. It's not like they walk into a hotel and think, oh, it's inferior quality, it's something different. You would struggle to find the differences between the ones we built traditionally and the ones we built modular. So guests really don't care. There are higher performance buildings because you actually have a bit more insulation between walls and whatnot. So yeah, this is sort of what they look like when they come from the factory, apart from the mattresses and on there and the decorations and there. But I want to share with you a couple of lessons learned from doing this for a while, especially from the manufacturing perspective. It's really hard for these guys because if you imagine running a modular factory, a shop that produces mods, you want that output to be steady, right? You want a predictable throughput of your factory of like 2,000 rooms a year. And that's not at all the way development works, right? We've heard the talk yesterday. We're going up and down. Finance is driving as crazy currently. So you have to constantly accelerate and stop, and that's killing the modular companies, right? So it's highly cyclical. So how do you anticipate that? So unless the modular industry figures out a way to control demand, right? If we all got together and said, hey, we're going to do 50 hotels, they all look the same, let's commit to them. Sure, we can set up a couple of factories, but that's not currently what's going on. Or the other alternatives, if you can control demand, figure out a way to scale up and down, right? So there's a couple of people that are thinking along those lines. But if you haven't got control over demand and are not able to scale or move your factory around to be nimble and set up, it's probably not going to go anywhere. But it's got huge potential. Because if you look at it, in our case, that whole guest room bulk, the mass, is 80% of the building volume, but only 20% of the cost. So if we can shift that balance, they should be a lot cheaper. Same with schedule, right? I mean, we're able to build hotels 30% faster, but the mod stacking only takes 20% of your schedule time. If you can improve the front end and the rear end, where you actually put all the mods together on site and get the building trades to be on board with that, you could improve a lot. If you ever do a modular project, you need to really unlearn some of the things you've learned in traditional construction. Sequencing, construction deals are different, and you really need to get all the stakeholders on board. That's the number one lesson. I think if you forget all the other slides, take this one home if you ever want to do a modular project. I think it holds true in every project that you do. You should bring people together and collaborate. I've heard a lot about that in the last day or two. But if you can't get the funder, the owner, designer, the general contractor, and the modular supplier under one roof, like the manufacturing industry does, and get them to collaborate and share the good, bad, and the ugly, it's not going anywhere. So I think currently, unfortunately, I don't see the modular industry taking over the world and being the norm for the next couple of years, even though I'm a big advocate. I would love to see it going that way. But unless we come up with some changes, it's not going to be what McKinsey said, the future for construction, but it's got great potential for a rollout, not for an individual project. If all you want to do is build one project, keep doing what you're doing. But if we can get people together and actually commit owner, developers, and a brand to work together and do a rollout, that'll be awesome. If we can standardize the product. In hotel land, there's real opportunity. You say, hey, I have a limited service standard box, and you change the FF&E a little bit. There's tremendous opportunity, but it's not there yet. So I don't know how to assemble a team and get people together to actually do this because it's a bold undertaking, but I'd love to see that happen. And I'm going to leave you with that. And if you have any questions, please feel free.
Yeah, we do have a couple minutes cushion before our next block of meetings and everything. So I know that there's a lot of curiosity about this. So does anybody have any questions you want to ask Menno while we're here? Questions? Anyone? No one? No, not one? Okay. Menno, you mentioned something interesting that caught my ear. Because I know in past sessions, there's been a lot of talk about just the difficulty finding manufacturers who do this, who specialize in this. And you said that with the construction industry being in the sort of turmoil it's in right now, that they're kind of being decimated. So what's going on with that? Like, what do you think the potential is for modular manufacturers to recover?
Yeah, as I said, I'm not too optimistic. I think there's enough space there for the current players to survive if they get their act together. But I don't see incredible growth unless we all change and standardize product and help the manufacturers to plan their factory. And we could do this in theory. But currently there's so few players out here in the US and even internationally. CMC in China are by far the biggest, and they were about to close shop a couple of years ago because they suffered from that same problem where they were running for 5 projects and then they had to stop. And that's not something you can sustain, right? Imagine having to scale up your factory and your people constantly. So it'll continue to be a struggle. And here in this country, obviously, you have the logistics to deal with, right? If you have a factory in Texas, how do you service New York, right? I want to build a hotel in New York. You have to ship it, right? So it's not that easy. So I think if you have an idea, a concept, and yeah, there's some people thinking about that, how you can decentralize it and have a pop-up plant and build your modules in a temporary warehouse. That's a smart idea. That's going places. Yeah, so for us, it's been cheaper to build for CitizenM. Not a lot, but that's also because we build in some of the highest labor markets in the US, right? If you build in New York or in the Bay Area, yeah, it's really super expensive. So modular does compete with that right off the bat, but it wouldn't compete here in Texas, for example, or in most areas in the US. Or if you're like in Minnesota, where we like climate challenged a couple of months a year, modular can counter that, right? So there's some niche opportunity there, but on a whole, I think it's only works on the coast where costs are prohibitive. For now, if we can get our act together and really push modular, you can build 20–30% cheaper and 40% faster. I'm convinced, without too much effort, honestly.
We do have another question here.
Morning. Where has there been other intersections with modular building, like low-income housing? Are there other?
Oh, yes. So where can you apply this, you mean? In what other sectors?
Well, I imagine you can apply it many places, but where is the interest? Where does it make sense aside from hotels?
So my answer is always, if you can envision your product as a collection of Lego blocks that can be put on a truck, you're in business, right? So student housing, urban condos, or right, small housing would still work. It's tough to envision an open plan office, like boxes. I don't know how that's going to work. So, I mean, even some of the hotel product that's out there is already too wide to be shipped and too bulky. I looked at some Vegas developments, and unless you're willing to sacrifice on real estate square footage, it really doesn't go anywhere because you can't put this thing on a truck. So.
In the back. Oh yeah, you're good and loud. Go ahead.
Can you talk about lessons learned during the construction with interfacing with general contractors and subcontractors that were on your projects that may not have been familiar with modular construction before they started the project? How did that go? How smooth was that? What were some of the pitfalls that you ran into?
Yeah, so I will say that nobody is an expert at this point, and I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. So the people that do this for the first time, it's really hard for them because they really need to unlearn all the stuff they've learned in construction. Sequencing, the sharing, risk reward, and having an open dialogue, really collaborating, that's not natural at all for people in construction environments. So to talk to a supervisor or a superintendent, say, hey, you now need to get your quality team on board to punch rooms, even though you're only excavating foundations at this point. That's really crazy, especially people that have done this for years. They look at you and go, what are you talking about? This does not make sense. So you really need to understand that there's some re-education to be done and have a team ready to do that and do a lot of hand-holding and education. So it's definitely not been an easy trajectory. So.
Right. I think we're at about time there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Menno. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.